They say some truths are better left unspoken, but what if the truth comes for you anyway, delivered not by a man, but by something that should not have known your name? It began on a grey October morning in 2013. Leonard Myers, a 52-year-old history teacher in upstate New York, lived a quiet, routine-driven life. Widowed for years and semi-retired, his days passed between lectures, dusty books, and crossword puzzles. The only remarkable thing about Leonard was how unremarkable he considered himself. That changed the day he received a letter. The envelope was old, yellowed at the edges, with no return address. Inside was a single folded page, handwritten in an immaculate, slanted script. It read, "On the night of October 28th, do not answer the door. It knows your name. You will be tempted." That was it. No explanation, no signature. Leonard stared at the note for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. Was it a joke? A prank by one of his students? Yet something about the handwriting made his hands tremble. It felt precise. Too precise. Like it wasn't written for him by someone who knew him, but by someone, or something, that had seen him without ever meeting him. He tried to forget it, placing the letter in the back of a drawer. But as the days crawled toward the 28th, strange things began to happen. The lights in his house would flicker between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m. every night. His dog, Jasper, would sit upright at the door, growling softly at nothing. And twice, Leonard woke to find his front door unlocked, though he was certain he had secured it. October 28th arrived. Leonard spent the day pacing. Every knock on the door made him jump, though they were just trick-or-treaters. The final group of children came by around 8:00 p.m. After that, silence fell, the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a living neighborhood. Even the wind outside seemed to hesitate. At 11:44 p.m., someone knocked. Leonard froze. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Not urgent, not aggressive, patient, like it had all the time in the world. His heart pounded as he moved closer to the door. Jasper barked once, then whimpered and retreated under the table. Leonard stood there, eyes locked on the knob. Another knock. Then a voice. Soft, melodic, almost childlike. "Leonard, open the door. You've always wanted to know, haven't you?" He stepped back, nearly tripping over a chair. That voice didn't sound human. It was too calm, too rehearsed, like it had said those words thousands of times. Leonard didn't answer. He didn't breathe. Minutes passed. Nothing. He slowly crept upstairs to look out the window that overlooked the front porch. What he saw chilled him to the core. There was no one there, but the shadow cast on the porch was unmistakable. Tall, unmoving, and it didn't match anything around it. It stood where the porch light should have reached, yet remained pitch black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Leonard backed away and locked himself in the bedroom. That night, he didn't sleep. The next morning, the shadow was gone, but etched into the wood of his front door were the words, "We speak again in 13 years." Leonard moved out of that house within a week. He left behind furniture, photos, everything but Jasper and a single box of personal files. He never told anyone, never reported it. Who would believe him? He relocated to a smaller town, changed his name, and tried to forget. But Leonard couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Mirrors in his house sometimes reflected things that weren't there. Birds would land outside his window, staring for hours. And once, in a grocery store, a little girl passed him and whispered, "You didn't answer." Years passed. Leonard grew older, slower. He no longer taught. His hair greyed and his body stiffened with age. Yet the fear remained fresh. He marked the calendar, October 28th, 2026. He couldn't stop it, but he wanted to be ready. That year, he moved again, this time into a cabin in the Adirondacks, miles from any town. He didn't tell anyone where he went. No phone, no computer, just books and silence. The day came. The wind howled like wolves circling prey. By nightfall, the fireplace had gone out, despite a healthy pile of logs. And then, at 11:44 p.m., 3 soft knocks. No voice this time, just the sound. Leonard sat in the center of the room, a shotgun in one hand, Jasper's old leash in the other. He didn't move. He didn't blink. The knocking stopped after 5 minutes. The next morning, Leonard was gone. The cabin was found a month later by a ranger who noticed the chimney had collapsed. The door was ajar. Inside, everything was covered in a thin layer of frost, except the center of the room, where a single wooden chair remained. On the wall behind the chair, burned into the wood, were the words, "The third time, you will let us in." Authorities never found Leonard. No signs of struggle, no prints, nothing. Just an unnatural cold and a silence that rang in the ears long after leaving. Some say Leonard was taken. Others believe he finally gave in to the madness. But a handful of people, those who've also received letters, believe something far more terrifying, that a prophecy is unfolding and Leonard was merely the beginning. And now, this year, another letter has surfaced. Same paper, same handwriting, same warning. This time, it's addressed to a woman in Michigan, a retired nurse named Cynthia. Her note reads, "You'll hear it too, the knock, the voice. The choice is yours." And the date? October 28th. Cynthia had never met Leonard, but her story would mirror his in eerie detail. She lived alone on the edge of a quiet lakeside town, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. The letter came in early October. She nearly threw it away, thinking it junk. But the handwriting, sharp, elegant, otherworldly, made her pause. She showed it to a friend, who laughed and said it sounded like a Halloween prank. But deep down, Cynthia felt something shift. It was the way her cat hissed at the envelope, the way her digital clock flickered the numbers 11:44 at random, and the dreams. Shadowy figures standing outside her house, whispering her name. On the night of the 28th, Cynthia lit every candle she owned. Electricity had gone out around sunset. No wind, no storm, just darkness. At exactly 11:44 p.m, there came the knock. She froze. The voice that followed wasn't like Leonard's account. It was someone she knew, her late husband's voice, soft and loving, calling her by the name only he used. "Sin, let me in. It's been so long. You don't have to be alone." Her heart shattered. Tears filled her eyes. But she didn't move. She remembered the warning. She knew it wasn't him. And when she whispered, "You're not real," the voice replied, "Not yet, but soon." Elliot Harris never believed in fate, let alone prophecies. A retired insurance investigator in his early 50s, He prided himself on being a man of facts, not feelings. On a cloudy Tuesday in late October, he wandered into a forgotten corner of Camden Town, searching for an antique map he once saw in a dusty old bookstore 10 years ago. But as the rusty bell chimed overhead and the warped wooden door creaked shut behind him, he found something else entirely. The shop was even more chaotic than he remembered. Towering shelves spilled with yellowed paperbacks, cracked leather-bound tomes, and handwritten ledgers. The air smelled of mildew and secrets. As he scanned the room, his eyes locked onto a peculiar, unmarked book resting atop a stack. Its cover was cracked, blackened, and warm to the touch. Inside, scrawled in jagged ink, were dates, hundreds of them, each followed by a sentence or two. Most were crossed out violently with thick red lines, but one stood out. November the 3rd, 2023. The listener will awaken, blood will answer. It was just 3 days away. That night, Elliot couldn't stop thinking about the line. He tossed and turned in his flat, a modest place above a quiet cafe, haunted by the cryptic words. At 3:13 a.m., he heard something, faint but deliberate, a whisper. It didn't come from outside or even through the walls. It came from inside the room, as though the air itself had spoken. He sat up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. He checked every corner, nothing, but on the kitchen counter, the book was there. He swore he'd left it in the bookstore. Flipping through the pages again, the dates now seemed different. The prophecy about November 3rd had grown. It now read, "The listener will awaken beneath the ticking breath of the clock. Blood will answer. The watcher returns." His hands trembled. There had been no mention of a clock before, and yet, at that moment, the old wall clock began to tick, though its batteries had died years ago. The next day, Elliot took the book to his old colleague Fiona Grayson, a historian specializing in occult texts. She met him in a small tea house near Hyde Park, her eyes widening as she skimmed the pages. This isn't just folklore," she whispered. "It's a derivative of the oracular manuscript thought to be destroyed in 1867. Every prophecy recorded in it came true. People were executed based on its writings." As rain began to pour against the windows, a tall man in a grey overcoat stepped into the tea house. He didn't order anything, just stood there, watching. His eyes never left Elliot. Fiona's voice dropped. "The listener. That's what they called the person chosen to fulfill the final prophecy. Elliot, I think it's you." He laughed it off nervously, but the man in the grey coat was still staring. And when they left the tea house, the man was gone. But deep in a puddle by the curb, a fresh footprint pointed toward Elliot's flat. That evening, Fiona insisted on staying with Elliot. They tried burning the book, but it wouldn't catch. They soaked it in water. It remained dry. At exactly midnight, the apartment filled with the smell of iron. Fiona screamed from the bathroom. Elliot rushed in to find her staring at her reflection. Across her left cheek was a red mark, like a fingerprint pressed into her skin. It wasn't from Elliot, and Fiona swore she hadn't touched anything. They both stared at the mirror, horrified, as condensation spelled out a new line in the steam. "He sees you now. The listener's blood is near." Driven by fear and desperation, Elliot followed a symbol from the book to an abandoned chapel on the edge of Hampstead Heath. The place was nearly in ruins, overtaken by ivy and silence. Inside, graffiti covered the walls. except for one corner that remained untouched, bearing a mural of a hooded figure holding a clock with bleeding hands. Behind the altar, Elliot found a hidden compartment with pages that had clearly been torn from the same book. They detailed rituals, warnings, and one disturbing truth. The listener must bleed before the watcher feeds. If not, the veil tears, and all will see. Fiona, visibly shaken, begged him to leave it all behind. But Elliot knew. This wasn't about belief anymore. It was happening whether he believed or not. The morning of November 3rd arrived. Quiet and cold, Fiona had vanished from the flat without a word. The clocks in Elliot's apartment had stopped at 3:13 a.m., the exact moment he first heard the whisper. Desperate, Elliot opened the book one last time. The prophecy had changed again. She bleeds, you bleed, he walks. The veil will thin at breath's end. He felt it then, a tightness in his chest, a creeping cold. The whisper returned, louder this time, clearer. Listen. He turned and saw Fiona, her eyes black, her voice not her own. You were chosen, Elliot. You listened. Now they will see through you. The walls of the apartment cracked as an unseen force pushed through. Paint peeled, light bulbs burst. Through the mirror, Elliot saw not his own reflection, but hundreds of faces screaming silently behind a thin, glistening surface, like skin stretched over glass. Fiona collapsed, blood streaming from her nose. The book opened by itself. Pages flipped until they reached the end. One final line appeared in ink that seemed to bleed. You are the final listener. The prophecy is fulfilled. Elliot screamed, his voice drowned by 1,000 whispers. The mirror shattered, and then silence. When Elliot opened his eyes, he was no longer in his apartment. The floor beneath him was cold stone, and the air smelled of damp earth and rot. He was inside a circular chamber with no windows or doors, lit by a flickering flame that floated mid-air. All around him, ancient symbols pulsed on the walls in a rhythm matching his heartbeat. Then he heard it, a low growl, like something ancient and angry stirring in the dark. The flame dimmed slightly, revealing claw marks gouged into the walls. Elliot backed away, breath caught in his throat. A voice, female but inhuman, echoed. The listener tried to flee. Now the listener sees. From the walls, long shadowy arms began to slither toward him. He sprinted through a sudden corridor that hadn't existed seconds before, each step echoing into the void. At the end, he stumbled into a flooded room. Water reached his knees, then his waist. It was ice cold and smelled of decay. In the water floated torn pages, some from the book, others with his own name etched into them. From beneath the surface, something grabbed his ankle. He screamed, falling backward as a pale face surfaced. Fiona's, but her skin was translucent, her eyes voids. You listened, she gurgled. Now drown in knowing. The walls shrieked. The water turned red. Elliot clawed at the walls, his fingernails tearing as he tried to escape. As he gasped for air, Elliot awoke back in his apartment, alone. Everything was still. The clock struck 3:13 again. On his chest was the book, now closed, sealed with fresh blood. When he tried to speak, he couldn't. His voice was gone. In the silence, the whispers began again. Only now they came from inside his skull. He looked in the mirror. His reflection moved a second too late. Behind him, the tall man in the grey coat appeared once more. But this time, he spoke. You were never chosen to stop the prophecy, Elliot. You were chosen to become it. It began with a splintered mirror in an old second-hand store on the outskirts of Blackridge. Ethan Walters, a 46-year-old insurance adjuster with a quiet life and predictable routines, had only entered the store to escape the rain. The mirror stood against the wall, half covered with a tattered velvet cloth, but something about it drew him in. As he lifted the cloth, a chill spread across his arms, and he shivered despite his coat. Etched faintly on the glass in what looked like old blood was a sentence that made his stomach turn. "He who sees must carry the truth." Ethan stepped back, frowning. It was probably some prank by a teenager or a forgotten prop from a horror exhibit. But as he turned to leave, his reflection didn't move with him. It remained frozen, eyes wide, mouth open as if screaming silently. Ethan froze. "What the hell?" he muttered, turning back sharply. The mirror was normal again. His reflection matched his movements. He laughed nervously, rubbing his eyes. It had to be the dim lighting, or maybe stress. Still, he left the store empty-handed and disturbed. But as he walked away and crossed onto Main Street, every reflective surface he passed, car windows, rain puddles, even the silver panel of a phone booth seemed to show that same distorted image of himself. That night, Ethan dreamed of fire. Not just any fire, but entire towns burning in orange rage, while shadows danced through the flames. He woke up drenched in sweat, gasping. The details clung to him like cobwebs. In the dream, he'd been holding something, a book with a broken clasp, and every time he tried to read from it, the pages turned to ash. At work, he couldn't focus. The dream kept replaying. By the third night, it had returned. Only now, he wasn't just an observer. He was walking through a decayed version of his own neighborhood, where people with hollow eyes whispered in a language he didn't understand. When he turned a corner, there it was again, the mirror, standing upright in the street, with fire reflecting from a scone that wasn't burning. Soon, the dreams became more specific. A hallway lined with identical doors, a girl crying behind one of them. The moment Ethan reached for the handle, a blackened hand slammed it shut from the other side. Always at the end, he'd see a mirror, and the phrase would be there again, clearer, louder, etched not just in blood, but burning into the glass itself. On the fifth morning, unable to sleep, Ethan visited a coffee shop he rarely went to. The barista gave him a second glance, but said nothing. As he stirred his drink absent-mindedly, an older man sat across from him without asking. He was lean, dressed in a worn coat, with piercing grey eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" the man said without preamble. Ethan stared, confused. "Saw what?" "The mirror. The mark is on you now. You're not the first." His voice was low, calm. Ethan felt a flush of panic. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Name's Carter. I saw it in 91, lost everything before I understood. You think it's a mirror? It's a prophecy conduit. You saw a piece of the end." Ethan pushed away from the table. "You're insane." "No, just ahead of you." Carter leaned in. "Have you heard the whispers yet? Have they called your name from the corner of your dreams?" Ethan left without finishing his drink, but Carter's voice stuck in his mind like a thorn. "You're not the first," he had said. Not the first. That meant there were others, survivors, or victims. Over the next week, Ethan noticed numbers showing up everywhere. 0409. Street signs, receipts. alarm clocks, all showing 4:09. He Googled the time. Nothing stood out until he looked into biblical references. Ezekiel 4:9. Take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, make bread of them. Strange, but not helpful. Then the name appeared, on his caller ID, on his laptop login screen, in emails he hadn't opened. Malroth. It didn't make sense. Not a contact, not a known name. When he searched for it, buried in occult forums, he found references to an ancient figure marked to destruction, famine, and false prophecy. Malroth, the whisperer of doomed futures. His stomach turned. It wasn't just coincidence. Something was following him, and the dreams were getting clearer. He saw people he knew, his boss, his neighbor, burning, always burning. Even more disturbing, when he tried to delete the emails, they wouldn't go. And the image in his mirror at home began to degrade. First, a slight delay, then different expressions. One morning, he watched as his reflection mouthed the word "run," even though Ethan hadn't moved his lips. Ethan tried to confide in his sister. She listened patiently but looked worried. "You're not sleeping," she said. "I think you should see someone." He shouted, "I'm not crazy, Lena. This is real. I can feel it." That night, he watched his bedroom walls ripple like fabric. Faces pushed through from the other side, their mouths moving without sound. At exactly 4:09 a.m., his door creaked open slowly by itself. A voice, hoarse and female, whispered from behind the dresser, "You are the bearer. The vessel must spill." He ran out of the house barefoot, shivering in the cold night. No one on the street believed him. A neighbor closed their blinds as he approached. The next day, his sister sent a doctor. Ethan pretended to comply. But in truth, he was already too far gone. When he looked at photographs, he noticed new people appearing in them, watching him, their faces expressionless. And the whispers began when he was fully awake. Short phrases, indecipherable, then clearer. "Pass it. Choose one," Carter called him again. "You can't fight it. You have to show someone else. Pass it. It's the only way to stop it." Ethan refused. "You mean curse someone else? You were shown because you were meant to choose. Prophecy isn't fate, it's a burden." Ethan slammed the phone down, but he knew Carter was right. The signs were escalating. The fire wasn't symbolic anymore. A local factory burned down the next day, 4:09 p.m. The dreams showed him more details now. A child with no eyes, a man stabbing himself in front of a mirror, then Ethan's own face, screaming in flames. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. He stopped going to work, kept the lights on at all times, bought a dozen crucifixes despite not being religious. But nothing stopped the whispers. They were no longer coming from mirrors. They were inside his head. Ethan returned to the second-hand store, but it was gone, boarded up. No listing in the phone book, as if it never existed. Desperate, he drove to Carter's address. He found the place abandoned, dust thick on every surface. But one thing stood in the center of the living room, a covered object, the mirror. He tore the cloth off, his reflection grinned at him, moving out of sync. Ethan screamed. The mirror shimmered. Fire, ash, twisted figures all appeared, and then one message, bold and etched like fire: "Pass the vision or perish within it." Ethan stared. Who would believe me? he muttered. And then he heard his own voice say, "They don't have to believe, they only have to see." He walked to the window, staring down at the street. A group of teenagers passed by, laughing, oblivious. Ethan's hand trembled. He turned back to the mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw Carter's reflection behind his own, smiling. Then the mirror went black,